This is Let's Talk Higher Ed, a podcast for high school counselors and university admissions representatives worldwide who aim to help connect students to their dream schools. In each episode, we hold candid conversations with our community of students, their counselors, and universities to discuss everything from dealing with anxious parents to ensuring a seamless transition to university life. Let's get started.
Welcome to Let's Talk Higher Ed podcast. I'm your host, Tim Munnerlyn, Senior Director of Education Partnerships at Cialfo. Cialfo supports counselors with our powerful and simple to use platform, helping counselors and students save time and making higher education more accessible worldwide. We also support universities. Cialfo is your trusted partner to help you find right fit undergraduate students from the largest network of international schools. On today's podcast, we invite Jeff Neill, college counselor at Graded, the American School of Sao Paulo, Brazil, to discuss our recent webinar on time-saving tips and tools for every counselor. We dive into the highlights from the webinar along with a few additional takeaways and insights. And I'm very, very happy to have Jeff Neill here on the show. How are you today?
Great, Tim. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Okay. Well, we did this webinar and we had a lot of people show up. It was one of our more popular webinars we've done. And we don't want to rehash every point, but we want to just talk about some of the things, after you do these kind of presentations, you think, oh, I wish I would have said this, or I expanded a little bit more of that. Any highlights for you that you remember from that webinar?
Sure. Yeah, I think quite a few. And it was an interesting webinar as well, because I've received quite a few emails and outreach from people who attended, and even from some people who didn't attend who wanted to hear a little bit more about this idea or that idea. I think one of the things that I think probably was most intriguing to people who are working in the college counseling domain is this idea of a FedEx day. And maybe, Tim, I can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. This FedEx Day, this is the golden idea out there. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I'll give full credit. This is not my idea. This comes obviously from the FedEx Corporation and was shared with me first in a book called From Good to Great, if I remember correctly. And the idea is the research supports that when 20% of your allocated time is given up to creative endeavors, productivity and I think flourishing within the workplace goes up. And again, that's based on research. So what I did is kind of applied this to my work day, my work week as a college counselor, where 20% of your time is one day per 5-day work week. And what we do is and I've brought this to each one of the schools where I've worked, and it's taken hold. We take one day and we block it off with no meetings, no student meetings whatsoever. And that, during the first semester, Northern Hemisphere first semester, that ends up being time to write, probably the most creative of creative endeavors, the writing of the counselor letters of recommendation. And, it gives that dedicated time to do that work, but it also gives time to catch up on those emails, to do sort of follow-up work that just kind of piles up. And so again, it's just a day where you sit and you do that work. I've got colleagues that prefer to work from home on those days. Each time I've presented this to the administration, it's been supported with apprehension at first. But I think when they see the lived results, it ends up, I think, paying dividends for everybody.
Great. So thanks. Just this unbelievable idea that you're going to take one day out of the week, going to get the critical work done, going to limit meetings, if not completely get rid of them. It sounds pretty fantastic.
It is. And, a couple sort of data points that I would share is one, when I'm working 5 days a week, meeting with students, I find that my threshold for tolerance of student meetings is maybe in that like 5 to 7 range. I can get through 5 or 7 30-minute student meetings without sort of totally tapping out mentally. When I do a FedEx day, what I found is I can get through 12 to 15 with no problem. I'm not worried about some of the residual follow-up emails or getting that kid that thing, because I will postpone that to the FedEx day. I'll just say, I'll do that on the FedEx day. And okay, so who's next? And so what I'm finding is I'm able to get through far more students in a given week by sacrificing one day per week. So that's been a pretty transformative idea in my work week.
Awesome. Well, one of the other things that we talked a lot about was creating a workspace and an inviting place for students to come and be a part of the counseling program. Any highlights from you about that?
Yeah, sure. So what we find is, there's a question that we often ask new counselors, which is trying to find your sweet spot. When are you at your very best as a college counselor? And one of the things that I've observed over the years is no matter who the counselor is or what their particular approach is, we all tend, not everyone, but most of us tend to be at our best in informal environments. So one of the thoughts that we had is let's increase those opportunities for informal interactions with students. So here at Graded, what we've done is we've turned our main office space, our community area, into a very student friendly space. We've got comfortable couches, we've got bean bags, we've got a popcorn machine, we've got coffee and tea, we have candy, lots of snacks to entice them in, but also workspaces, study spaces where they right now, as we're recording this, there's two groups of ninth grade girls and 10th grade boys sitting out there doing work. They're using the space and they're in there. So we're getting to know them. We're getting to interact with them. We're talking to them, and every once in a while they ask a really germane, college counseling question, but so much of it is just breaking the ice and knowing that, we're here for them and knowing that this is a space that they can use. So that's a big piece of the philosophy is again, increasing those touch points in an informal setting.
Right. We talked a lot about calendaring and sitting down and mapping out a whole year. You talked a lot about working backwards. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about calendaring, I've got two, I think, different approaches. One is on the annual scale where we do work in a very cyclical world where things are just, variations on a theme from the previous year. So what we have a commitment to doing is just writing down everything basically in a spreadsheet, date, event, and then notes. And the notes each year are like, how could we do this better? Is the timing right? And then we just keep writing. We record everything that we do from mass emails to student programs to classroom time to announcements, trying to think what else, some of our newsletters and things like that. And we just try to revisit that at the beginning of every week. What did we do this week last year based on the notes that we've already constructed? And we just keep updating that. So this iterative process of a master calendar is something that I've shared elsewhere that is, I think taken on a life of its own in other counseling offices. Then the second idea in terms of calendaring that I'm pretty committed to is getting students to work backwards, particularly when we get to that senior first semester. When we try to find those students, we're going to have 82% of our seniors who have a November 1st deadline. And we give them a blank calendar, have them circle November 1st and work backwards from there. We have a commitment in our office to having them and the counselors submit all documents, all applications 2 weeks before a posted deadline. So we circle, it's going to be Tuesday, October 18th. That's the submission deadline for students. So how do they then plan backwards to get those applications done? And we have them put everything from, submitting of testing scores if they're doing that. When will they be finished with supplemental essays? When will they be done with the actual application, the supplement, the main Common App application or wherever in the world they're applying? We just have them work backwards and we have them circle on the calendar when they plan to have those things done. Then as a second overlay, we have them go through and circle the dates, put a little star where they feel they will need an appointment with their college counselor. And we use Calendly. Other schools use Google or other scheduling software, and we have them go through and actually book their meetings. So a student in early August, when we begin, will actually have, a sequence of 6 or 7 meetings with their college counselor scheduled through the end of October, often into December from the first week. So it is just a way to, I guess, work backwards and do that calendaring, doing that scheduling that again, when you present it to students in that way, it increases their accountability and their sort of follow through, I guess, on
Got
that
it.
process.
One of the biggest takeaways that I had during our presentation was talking about Parkinson's law. And that's basically that our work expands to fill in the time available for its completion. So if you have a month to do a presentation and get it ready, it's going to take you exactly 1 month to do that. And I know as counselors, you get a lot of things coming at you and you tend to think, oh, I've got, a couple weeks before that needs to be done. And what we find is that just kind of hangs over our head for quite some time. And so being able to constrict that and say, hey, I've got time to do this here now, let me do it, or put it on a calendar, get it done with, don't let it expand out. We were talking a little bit before we were recording this. You're talking about you have this approach with dealing with email, which I know every counselor wakes up to 50 to 100 pieces of email each day. What's your approach to email now?
Yeah. So this has taken on a lot of interest from a lot of counselors. But in addition to FedEx days, which I think is a primary way to address some of this, I also do something else where I have a half an hour blocked off every day on my schedule for just email. And so what I do is I apply what others have called a one-touch email policy. When I open an email the first time, I deal with that email. If it's a really short response, I'll send a quick response. Yes, no, come see me. Quick, go do that. If it's going to take a lengthier reply, I will do one of two different things. If it's postpone it either to a FedEx day or to that time during which I have set aside for emails, and I'll hide it from my inbox. I love the Google function where you can just hide the email so it's not weighing on my mind. It's not occupying. It'll pop up when I need it to, when in that time that's scheduled. Or the other thing, if it's going to be a lengthier one, a parent email, for example, where they're really concerned about a child, I will just book a time in my own calendar for myself to respond to that particular email. Again, Google's really great because you can make an event out of an email. And that's something that I do as well. So again, one touch email where I deal with email the first time that it comes through. So it's not just, I'm not becoming a victim of my inbox.
Got it. Coming up in the next couple of weeks on Wednesday, October 12th, we're going to have a webinar called Counselor Self-Care and Mental Health. We've got a psychologist and medical director at a counseling service program in Hong Kong. Dr. Michael Eason's going to join us for that. And we're going to talk about burnout and what that looks like amongst educational professionals. And, you and I have talked a lot about this over our years of working together about our job as counselors. Where are the boundaries? What is good enough? Jeff, you're an accomplished counselor. You've been doing this for a number of years in a variety of situations. Any words of advice of what is good enough? And do I need to know everything about everything all the time? What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Tim. And maybe it's a topic for another webinar at some point. But, I think simply put, I would say that, from where I sit, I think, what is good enough is something that you constantly need to revisit. And I would say also over time, when I first started doing this work, I'll just give the quick example that I always felt that there was a greater expectation that I knew all of the answers, that I was much more of possessed of an encyclopedic understanding of every college and university out there. And before I met with students, we would often ask for their list of schools. And part of the reason for that was so that we could do research. Now I do not feel as compelled. I think part of that is age and wisdom, but I think it's partially also just the growth of the chaos within college counseling, college admissions world over the last 20 years since I've been doing this work. But we're not really I think felt to be that content expert. We are expected to know how to get those answers and how to counsel students with a lot of those answers. But the reason I bring that up is to take a step back. We have to constantly revisit this idea of like, what is good enough? What was good enough 22 years ago when I first started doing this work is a very different good enough than what it is right now. Now I feel as a counselor that I need to have a bigger bag of tricks to access and reach every single student that comes through my door. Whereas way back then, it was just a matter of what did I know? And that's changed quite a bit. So I think that's one side of that. Another perspective on this idea of what is good enough is thinking about that student that's sitting across from you and all the different ways in which that student might come in with different experiences, aptitudes, interests, and what is the common, and again, I steal a term from the business world, they call it the MVP, the minimum viable product. What is the minimum viable product that your college counseling offer is espousing? What is it that if there's an art student looking to go to school in Brussels versus a business student who wants to go to somewhere in the US, what is the common experience that you're willing to offer those students? Taking time to think about those things, and it might be strange in your perspective that this is coming up in a webinar or a podcast on efficiency. But when you focus on those things, it definitely increases the efficiency and efficacy of the work that you do. Thinking about what is your ultimate goal and what is your ultimate aim?
Yeah, I think that's great. And yeah, I think it lowers our own anxiety about it. And that's some really great words of advice there. For those of you who are joining us for this podcast, just a reminder that we did a webinar. We'll put this in the show notes, but basically we had over 50 practical tips for counselors of how they can save time. these were just several of the highlights of it and things that we wanted to talk more about it. Jeff, thanks so much for being a guest on the webinar and also on our podcast today. What are you going to be doing on your next FedEx day?
Writing recs. It is October 5th where I am right now, and I've got maybe 22 more to go. So lots of recs this time of year.
We haven't solved that problem yet, the whole rec writing yet, have we?
Not yet. We're working on it.
All right, Jeff, all the best. And to all your students there in Sao Paulo, I want to wish them all the best this year as well.
Thanks so much, Tim. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Let's Talk Higher Ed. This show is brought to you by Cialfo, a fast-growing global edtech company and student-first career exploration and college application network. If you enjoyed this episode, then follow Let's Talk Higher Ed wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Or join us online at cialfo.co/podcast for all of the latest episodes.